wasn't, I mean, wasn't familiar with Calvin before I applied for a job here, so.
Where are you from?
I'm from Ohio,
Okay.
and my husband went to Kendall College of Art and Design, and then I found the job here, and, but once I started, I just loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it.
How long have you been here?
10 years.
Okay.
Oh, good for you. You liked Grand Rapids or you liked the college or both?
Both. I mean,
Yeah.
my husband chose to go to Kendall because we liked Grand Rapids, and then we stayed because I got the job here at Calvin. Yeah,
All right.
and I really enjoyed it, so.
Is he still at Kendall?
No, I mean, he graduated with his
Oh,
MFA.
he was, got it.
Yeah.
He was like there as a student, not as a professor.
Yeah.
So what do you teach here?
Marketing.
Awesome.
Awesome.
And I'm the chair of the scholarship support team, so, and we're the ones that organize this event.
Okay.
So.
How's it going?
Are you like scholarship support team for the whole university?
No, for the school business.
For the school business.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be trying to do it for the whole university.
The diversity of actors for sure.
Yeah, it's so different, but yeah, we're just trying to support scholarships among our university.
Very nice, very nice.
So what brings you guys out Monday afternoon at 4 o'clock?
Oh my gosh, we were just joking. Cheers.
First of all, I do have a deep passion for Calvin. I think it's good for me. We, between the two of us, have 5 children. One of them graduated from here last year. Is at Michigan State School. I have a senior here.
Oh, nice.
She has a daughter at home. And I just think these sorts of institutions have a profound impact on me. And yeah, so I still like to continue my connection.
What started it is a friend of ours recently sold a business, is doing some about the calls. And so that, I think that was how you ended up on the website thinking like, okay, well, we should be doing lifelong learning, like, and you're kind of always in learning mode.
Well, yeah, my
He sent me
father,
this, oh, do you wanna go to
we
this?
talk about this kind of stuff all the time on bike rides. Things like that. How do you integrate your faith in your life, you know?
So I don't really, I wasn't even sure what to expect.
And I haven't been in this building yet, and I'm in St. Jansma, and I don't use it.
I do. No, I feel like I'm.
Oh, yeah, I wanna see it.
That's almost touched.
There's tons of events organized by the Calvin Center for International.
Is that really?
Yeah, we just had an executive breakfast on, there's an executive breakfast series and they have different topics. They bring alumni back.
Oh, I've
to
read
talk
about
about.
those, yeah.
Yeah, there's a CB Pals, it's like an award for partners with the school business. Yes, speaker every fall, but there's a lot of different events. Really, if you follow like our.
You went sports club.
Yeah.
We've gotten better about
I've seen that advertised, and I need to be proactive, because the way my schedule works, I have to be way out in advance of it.
Yeah.
Morning things, you know, I got block of things in the morning.
Yeah.
So I have a pretty regimented start time.
Yeah.
It used to start at like, they start like 7.
Yeah,
It's
I
pretty
think
early.
that's right, they're early, yeah. Well, it's nice to meet you guys.
Thank you. Thanks for introducing yourself.
Yeah.
I read.
Hi,
Jill, how are you doing?
Good.
Would you like to see what's back behind it?
I do remember.
Biggest business.
I'm gonna lower my legs.
It's really for technical.
How you doing? I'm Glenn Woodlawn.
Jim, glad to meet you, Tom Rowe.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, it's Jim, Phil.
Bill?
Yeah, Phil Vanderlucht.
Bill Vanderluck.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
And I'm Megan Vanderluck.
Hey Megan, nice to meet you.
I met you have a son?
And we here at Calvin.
Yeah?
I don't.
Is he older? And, are you from Chicago?
Right.
Yeah, so I met,
Where were you?
I could have swore it was your son or daughter.
Best students were someone else other than office.
Yeah.
You notice?
Where do you go to church?
I'm sure he's honored.
Need a Bible church.
My son is the information director of the
Oh, and I volunteer in production. What's his name?
Mike.
Oh, yeah, so Mike and I went to Turkey together.
We can go with it, these are actually really fun.
Yeah, so we were on that trip. I was the guy that schlepped all the stuff around for him. Yeah, so he was telling me about that
Yeah. What was that thing? Yeah, March of 21, that was your point.
Right,
Hey, we still on for tomorrow?
What was your background again?
I ran a center at Methodist University in Chicago. Center for Values Driven Leadership. So that's my field in leadership organizational.
I guess I never.
I'd love to go to results.
Small world.
Yeah, that is, isn't it?
Hey, you're kidding me.
This is my wife Megan. I'll go.
Hey, Megan, how are you?
Very nice to meet you.
Bob Wolford's mentor. This is the gentleman.
At least keep it lighthearted, right, Trust?
With a good number of time.
What a privilege. Hey, all over again.
James?
Ken, how are you?
Good, buddy.
I'm gonna go ahead and get things started. Welcome, everybody. I'm Jim Ludum. I'm Dean of the School of Business here at Calvin University, and I just want to extend a very warm welcome to you for this, our second annual award session for our award in Christianity in Business. And just to put it in context a little bit, our vision here in the School of Business at Calvin University is to be a world leader in Reformed Christian business education. And one of the most important things we can do to be a world leader is to produce high quality, high impact scholarship. And one of the ways that helps facilitate high quality, high impact scholarship is connecting with top scholars from other universities, bringing them here, celebrating their accomplishments and learning from them and their leading edge research. And that's what we're all about today. The award for scholarship on Christianity in business specifically is designed to recognize, promote, and learn from Christian scholarship that is rigorous, beautiful, interesting, and useful. Rigorous, beautiful, interesting, and useful. And this year's award winner is all of those things. After a review of many articles, the scholarship support team, comprised of Calvin business faculty Jill Reisner, Jason Stansberry, Bob Ames, and myself, selected the article that we're going to be hearing about today, titled, "Trying to Serve Two Masters is Easy Compared to Three. Identity Multiplicity Work by Christian Impact Investors." And the article was written by 5 authors. Brett Smith, Amanda Lawson, and Tim Holcomb from Miami University of Ohio, Jessica Jones from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and Amy Minich of the Impact Foundation in Kansas City. And Dr. Brett Smith is here with us today. He's the lead author on the article, and he will be sharing his thoughts and being in dialogue with us about it. But let me just say a couple of words about what we heard from the reviewers of the article. One reviewer said, "The paper is well written, clear, concise, and well organized. Ideas are communicated clearly, and the use of quotes from informants illustrates the concepts well and makes everything very accessible and human." It's one of the things we love about great scholarship is it's interesting to read and it's fun to read. A second one said, "I liked how the paper was a contribution to the faith integration, impact investing, and social identity literature all at once. Its conclusions were readily applicable, or are readily applicable for Christian investors, entrepreneurs, owners, and managers striving to authentically integrate their faith into their work." And the third reviewer said, "What I like most about the article is that it explores impact investing from the standpoint of identity theory, rather than financial theory or institutional theory, which is fresh and new, and it digs deeply into the ways in which an impact investor's religious identity interacts with his or her social and financial identities when making decisions. This line of inquiry is not only important for the fields of entrepreneurship and impact investing, but also has relevance for every other area of Christian business scholarship. How does our identity as Christians influence what we do in business scholarship and in business as business leaders? So, for their rigorous, beautiful, interesting, and useful article, let's give Brett and his colleagues, his co-authors, a big round of applause. But before I introduce Brett formally, I just want to give thanks to a couple of folks. First, I want to thank our scholarship support team, and particularly Jill Reisner, for establishing this award and leading it with such a high degree of excellence. I also want to thank the Calvin Center for Innovation in Business, led by Bob Ames, who I don't think is in the room. I think he's teaching, for supporting this financially. And then I want to extend a very special thanks to Kristen Groom. Is Kristen in the room? Right here. Who is the program coordinator in the Calvin Center for Innovation in Business, who, as always, did a phenomenal job of planning and organizing today's events. So let's give Kristen, Jill, and the scholarship support team a great big round of applause. Now the introduction to Dr. Brett Smith. Brett is the founding director of the Center for Life at Miami University in Ohio. And LIFE stands for Leading the Integration of Faith and Entrepreneurship. So it's the Center for Life. It's the Center for Leading the Integration of Faith and Entrepreneurship. Brett, through that center, is opening pathways in higher education for the integration of faith and entrepreneurship for universities, scholars, students, business leaders, and entrepreneurs. And Brett's work has been featured in the Financial Times, Forbes, Newsweek, Time, as well as the Nelson Mandela Foundation, TEDx, and the United Nations. So Brett, it's great to have you here. We can't wait to learn from you. Welcome.
Thank you very much. So all we can do is like go downhill from there, right? Like they've set the expectations so high that we're bound to fail, but we'll try to fail gracefully, at least as we do it. We start by not trying to contradict Jesus, just to be clear with the title, but we really are trying to step into this space. Please, on behalf of my entire team, thanks to Dean Ludema, thanks to the scholarship committee, we're truly honored to be here and truly honored as the recipient of this year's award. So we're super gracious and glad to be here. Just a minute, if you will, on my own background, as it might help provide a bit of context. I'm a second career academic. I say that without pride or prejudice. I just say that because that's who I am. But what that does encourage us to do is to do research that is practically relevant and academically rigorous. Like we really are trying to connect both of those dots. That's not always easy to do, as you'll see, but that is at least the attempt of what we're doing. My own story, as I said, I'm first career business person, entrepreneur, those sorts of things. And God got a hold of me and he said, hey, I think you'll teach. I'm like, yeah, that'd be awesome when I retire. He said, no, I think now. Okay, now it is. I built our program in social entrepreneurship. I ran our entrepreneurship program for a number of years. And then about 5 years ago, as audible as I can understand God, he said, I think it's time to not step up. I'd been offered or at least had a conversation about being the dean of our business school. I think it's time to step down. So I stepped down. And I'm like, great, what next? And as clear as I can tell, it was go build a program on faith and entrepreneurship at a secular university. Perfect, that sounds awesome. What could be easier? But that's what we set out to do over the last 5 years. And so that's a little context and background for what we're doing. I was in Peter's class this afternoon, and the students were working on business ideas. And so I'd go and say, hey, tell me about what you're working on. I said, no, don't tell me the solution, tell me the problem. And so too, as one of my colleagues says, eat our own dog food, if you will. We start with what's the problem? Like, what is the problem that life's trying to do? And here are a number of things that it's trying to do. I suppose I'd go down to number 4. There is a massive resurgence of interest in the practice of, not set aside academics, set aside academic research, in the practice of entrepreneurs increasingly bringing their faith into their ventures. Okay, and that's awesome. That's super encouraging to see people do this. And much of what they rely on is N=1, their own story. Okay, so we don't have lots of data on how does this work and what's not working, all the other things. And yet there's this huge movement. Sort of this huge movement without knowledge. I don't know if you see the potential problems here, but there may be some. And so what we're trying to do is just add to that. Not the least of these is the last one. Some 70% of students, even that grow up in the faith, question or leave their faith at some point during their college years. And so this is part of the issue. Second part of it looks like this. We are at a faith-based university, cannot talk about religion in the business school. Okay? PhD student at a faith-based university. I'm committed to studying faith and entrepreneurship, but my faculty advisor won't support it. Okay? And so these are some of the kinds of things that we're seeing. And to step into this, we decide, okay, we're going to try and build this program, and the goal looks something like this. The goal doesn't look like that. Next slide will be the goal. This is the solution. My apologies. The solution to the problem looks something like this. We're going to build a center that is focused on creating scientifically rigorous, practically relevant knowledge. We're going to start with academic research, I'll tell you why in just a moment, and then we're going to build on top of that scalable experiences, curricular, co-curricular, etc. Here's the goal. The goal is this: to arm the next generation of entrepreneurs with world-class knowledge and experience at the intersection of faith and entrepreneurship. Let me be clear. This has nothing to do with Miami. This has nothing to do with life. This has nothing to do with me. This is a kingdom play about trying to do this with other schools, do it in collaboration. We had wonderful conversations with several faculty here at Calvin today about what that looks like to start to do that together. There's lots of work going on in this. It's pretty fragmented. So how do we pull together, and how do we build together, and how do we scale together? That's really where we're headed. So we start with academic research. I've got a picture there. It's a little hard to see. Any Ted Lasso fans out there? Okay, a few Ted Lasso fans. And if you're a Ted Lasso fan, what is one of his most famous quotes, at least as it relates to darts? Be curious, not judgmental. So, wherever you came from today about academic research, be curious, not judgmental, right? And all I mean by that is, like, in a good-spirited nature, like, academic research matters. It matters a lot. We do a really bad job as academics, holistically, at helping you see that. So let me try in a couple of ways. First, it establishes credibility in higher ed. Like, it generates knowledge. Everyone's like, teaching is so important. Yes, it is, about disseminating knowledge. And research is so important about creating knowledge, right? It contributes to practice. Like, anytime you hear something that you don't believe, like wearing the same outfit every day is actually good for your creativity because you don't waste it on picking. I wear this all over. This is my dress-up outfit. I also have one that's just a quarter zip when it's not so fancy. Jeans every day, like, it's all the same. And all I say is there's a study that says when you don't believe something, people do that. So this is part of the work that we're out to do. Create the studies that say about faith and entrepreneurship, and not just us, but other scholars around the world. And then lastly, I mentioned this morning, everyone's like, yeah, but who cares? You spent years on that, and only 100 people are ever going to read your paper. And I'm like, it'll probably be like 50 or 25. And I'm like, but do you know how many of those people teach? And now we start to have a different model. Now you start to say, let's imagine 100 people do read it, or 1,000 people do read it, and they start to teach thousands upon thousands, and you do have a really scalable, sort of high leverage platform. So, a little bit on academic research, or what Dr. Nathan Hatch says. Like, if there's ever to even be the possibility of Christian thinking going forward, we must begin with first order Christian scholarship. Then he goes on and says, while it is exceptionally rare for any particular Christian scholar to make a difference and a unique contribution to shape a discipline, all, that looks like all, A-L-L, all Christ-following professors should strive to excel and to reflect him in their work. And so this is part of our call. This is part of our encouragement. And I would go one step further. There actually might be, at least in entrepreneurship, the opportunity to shape a discipline. And this is what we're out trying to do right now, not alone, in partnership, not for us, but for the next generation of entrepreneurs. One, cultivate academic research, right? Do it through this, model the way, do it through others. We do a research conference, we have a PhD seminar, lots of people are stepping into this space, and do it through PhD students. Second, scale this through teaching to other campuses and practitioners. Right, so Calvin is doing awesome work here. I learned about the startup garage that I did not know about today. That's fantastic work. But Wheaton is doing awesome work, and so too is Grove City and Biola and Seattle Pacific and on and on. And it's so fragmented. And so how do we pull that together, and how do we scale that both breadth to more campuses and depth within each campus? How do you scale that? And then lastly, how do you build a talent pipeline? Like, what if we have a bunch of faith-driven entrepreneurs who are saying, you know who I really want to hire from Calvin? Someone who has lots and lots of interest in faith-driven business. Great. That just doesn't scale very well. Okay? We only have so many students coming out so many times, but imagine if you have 30 or 50 or 100 campuses doing this, and now you have more and more practitioners coming. We have this huge opportunity to meet, to truly change the way that we do business going forward. So, enough background. That's a little bit on what we're trying to do. This is sort of our vision. Every entrepreneur authentically. And all that means is it's not our job to tell somebody how they integrate their faith in their entrepreneurship. They're actually uniquely called. And how you may integrate it, how I may integrate it, how they may integrate it may be totally different. But it needs to be authentic to them and needs to represent their calling. So that's a little bit about where we've been and where we're headed. Now, onto the show. Like all of that preamble, see, this is a problem with academics. They talk too long about everything. But let's try. So here's the paper that we jumped into. The basic idea, the context for it is we were doing impact investing. For those of you who know, that's awesome. For those of you who don't. Investing with an intention to generate positive, measurable social, environmental impact alongside financial return. So we can start to already see the problem is I've got lots of things going on in my head about how to do this. Now, why do we have any reason to believe that faith may play a role or we should study it? Well, number one, impact investing has deep ties. It's sort of this natural extension. Like, how do we go be the hands and feet of God? I don't know. Entrepreneurship is one. It's not the only, but it's a wonderful mechanism about how you might go about do that. And this is indicting. Faith-based investors have yet to pursue major impact portfolios. They manage trillions of dollars, and a tiny fraction of it is even beginning to work in this area. And so there's both a need and there's an opportunity. And this shouldn't be a surprise. We shouldn't really have this disconnect. We know that impact investing actually connects to sort of century-old tradition and more recent contemporary work on like socially responsible investing. And so there is sort of this natural bridge. So that's a little bit on impact investing. Now, we do this theory thing. Here's what theory is. A really good friend. And when you're going through your PhD program, at some point you're like, this is dumb. Like, I don't know why we're doing all this research stuff. Like, no one's going to read it. And then you talk to practitioners, and they are awesome, and they will tell you their own story, and their stories are great. But their stories are often n equals 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever theirs is. Think of theory as 1,000 case studies. That's what theory is. Theory is what happens over and over and over again that replicates it. We can start to begin to predict about what we're doing. And so that's what theory is. Here we're leaning on something called identity theory. It's super simple. Think about the number of hats you wear. Or think about the number of roles you have in your life. Okay, you might be a parent, you might be a brother, you might be a student or a professor. Okay, that's all we're talking about. Is what are the roles and behaviors and norms that come out of whatever role that is? And any one of us, anyone just have one role in their life? Of course not. But what happens when you begin to push those roles together, and then how do we deal with that, or how do we do what we call sort of identity work? So this is what we think, and this is what we've heard impact investors look like on a somewhat, daily basis. Okay? They've got all these different things, all these different issues, all these different challenges going on at the same time. So we said, awesome. How do they deal with this? How do they manage what we're calling identity multiplicity, the goals, the values, the responsibilities from these different roles in the context of impact investing? So we looked at Christian entrepreneurs who cared about investing and they also cared about making a social impact difference. All right, so how did we do this? We did a longitudinal qualitative. Qualitative means we interviewed people. We looked at external data. We borrowed some data that was already out there, in the public market. And what we started to do is piece this together and say, how do we understand this? Now, why qualitative? Qualitative is really useful at the beginning, at exploratory questions, when you don't really know what's going on. Like later, you do have to do quantitative testing. But until you know what you're talking about, it's kind of silly to do quantitative testing. So what this is qualitative. We do qualitative interviews with same sets of people over and over. This particular project took over 4 years. Awesome. 4 years, 100 people read it. But remember how many people those people teach. It's a big deal. All right, so this is what we did. We included a total of 99 different sources of data. That gives you sort of a breakdown of what that looks like, which means we ended up with almost 900 pages of text. Now all we have to do is figure out the story in 900 pages of text. And so that's what we went about trying to do. There are qualitative methodologies that allow you to go through this. It's called an interpretivist approach. Every interview transcribed verbatim. Every interview then coded by not one but multiple interviewers to start to see, are we having some triangulation about the data and what it looks like. So happy to talk about that later. I'm sure lots of people will be interested. So what do we find? It's okay, you can laugh. I know, it's like academic, it's all right. Here's what our model is. Okay, thank you. No, we'll carry on and try and explain this just a little bit. So what we find in the beginning is impact investors experience these tensions between these multiple roles. Not a great surprise. We sort of knew this was going to happen. The question is, what do they do with them? We find they prioritize one of their identities. In this case, it happens to be their faith identity. We'll talk about that. But they still have these other different identities going on. So they still have to manage the interrelationships between these other identities. We figured out a couple of ways about how they do that. And this is not a one-time decision. Imagine your own faith. It's not like, oh yes, I decided that and then no problems ever again. If that's you, truly, God bless you. For the rest of us, that's not exactly how it works. Neither these guys. Even when they had prioritized one, it didn't stay prioritized. There's this constant juggling and tension. And we figured out what they ended up doing. Again, a word that's not so foreign to us. They end up surrendering. They surrender one of their identities on behalf of others. We'll talk about that in a sec. So let me break this down into piece by piece. They experience tensions and they have to prioritize one of those identities. What does that look like? It looks like this. In our case, we found that they experience different trade-offs between norms of like principal investing. Like, hey, you're an investor. You are supposed to, I don't know, generate a financial return. Like that's your job. And human flourishing. Like, don't you have a bigger calling about how people live? So what did it look like? I'll step back for just a sec. We are programmed our entire lives to seek higher returns. You sit at the bar and say, I made this investment and got great financial returns. No one says, I fed a few people in Africa and I got my money back. And this is this trade-off. This is this tension. Like, isn't feeding a bunch of people in Africa awesome? Yes, of course. And yet it doesn't fit with our mental model of what investing might look like. Or this one. The question is, are we worried enough about certain populations or certain problems where we have to say, truly coming from a place of faith and biblical values, we might be encouraged to be more concessionary on financial returns and more aggressive and ambitious on social or spiritual returns. And lastly, what we saw from many of the different investors is, I consider myself a faith-driven impact investor. Meaning I start with my faith. Like that is my driving. That's my meta logic, if you will, that drives everything I do. And that sounds all nice and pretty. But if we think about this, and this is actually a 2x2 from one of the investors. I know it looks like an academic thing. It's not. And what it says is on one axis you've got financial, low and high, and on the other you've got spiritual or social, low and high. Okay? And we all are like, yeah, okay, well, no one's going to go in the low bucket, right? And everyone's going to run to the high bucket. Yes, except that's not where the majority of the opportunities are. Turns out what actually happens is these two buckets are where the vast majority of opportunities are. You're either trading off on spiritual social returns to get a higher financial return, or up in the spirit-led, you're trading off on financial returns to get a higher social spiritual. These are where the ethics issues come in. These are where the identity challenges come in, are in these two buckets of like where the vast majority of the opportunities are. So this is kind of what we saw. Second, after they prioritized this faith identity, they still had other identities out there. So now I still have this social, spiritual, like what am I going to do with those things and how am I going to reconcile those? What we found is they used two different mechanisms, one of which we call shadowing and one of which we call distinguishing. Shadowing just means this. Shadowing means where one identity casts a shadow over another, thereby enabling the simultaneous pursuit. So think of it this way. If I'm doing God's work, wouldn't feeding hungry people fit in that category? Like they consider those one and the same thing. So they allow their identities to become a dual identity, just a faith identity, just a financial identity, and they combine social and religion. Because they say social often serves as a proxy. Social is a really good measure. Like if we're getting people out of the sex trade in India, that seems like a redemptive outcome, right? Like that seems like a positive kingdom sort of thing. So if that's social and I measure the number of people we get out of the sex trade, that's awesome. And that's good enough for me, at least on the faith-based front. So lifting people out of poverty is a good kingdom outcome. It's consistent with the Bible. It's consistent with the Christian worldview. But not everyone did that. Some people are like, no, that doesn't work for us. That's maybe not enough due diligence is sometimes what we heard here. And instead, they did what we call distinguishing, which is keeping all three identities separate and having some minimum threshold that you must get over to actually have it qualify. So we call it non-compensatory. That means you can't have a 3 on one and a 5 on the other and say on average they're 4. What most of them said is they have to get over some metric to allow this. So one investor told us, financial impact was necessary, but also shared, I have to have social impact and I have to have spiritual impact, meaning I need at least a 4 or I'm not making the investment. They actually shared with us their sheet. Like this is what they did. They identified what a 1 to 5 is, and they're saying if I don't have a 4 on it, even if it's on social, if I don't see it tangibly and measurably on spiritual, we're not doing it. I'd be happy to come back to what does it mean to measure spiritual outcomes. That's a really good question. We won't touch on it now, but I do think it's very relevant. So this is what we saw. They managed it by either combining them and calling them one, sort of shadowing, or by distinguishing, but having them all meet some minimum threshold. And then lastly, they had to sort of reinforce this prioritized identity, and we see they do that through what we call surrendering. Surrendering is this. Like we know what surrendering is in our faith-based context, and this would be my encouragement to any scholar in here. We can take Christian principles and move them into the mainstream conversation in the academy, and that's all this is. This is taking a mainstream Christian principle and moving it into the secular conversation, okay? So what's surrendering mean? The partial sacrificing of goals of one or more identities in favor of the goals of another based on the individual self-reflective importance of that role, okay? So all that means is I've got these 3. I'm literally willing to trade off. I'm willing to sacrifice one of those. I'm willing to be the guy at the bar who says, I fed a few people and I got my money back. And people look at you like, boy, you're a really good investor. No, but I'm a really good impact investor. I'm a really good Christian impact investor. Okay. So a couple of things. There are sort of 3 ideas that drew this. Number 1 is God as owner, like stewardship principle. When I figured out it was 0% mine and 100% God's, that's really the way that it changed the way I looked at things. I came to understand my money was not mine. I was simply a steward. So if I'm worried about my money is all mine, it's all mine, it's all mine, I'm worried about that financial return. But if I'm saying it's God's, and God's sort of saying, hey, I want you to put some of that money over here, they were enabled to be able to do that. Second, it was a critical check. Am I trying to push to make this successful because I feel like that's what the Lord's asking me to do, or because I want to feel better about myself or satisfy some internal motivation? Okay. And then lastly, this notion of sort of awareness of enough. This is an interesting issue. It came out with lots and lots of people. It said, if God chooses for us to prosper, we're not going to see all of that as a call to increase our lifestyle, but instead see it as an opportunity to use the dollars God provides for kingdom purposes. This is a wonderful example. If you don't know this story, please look it up. A guy named Alan Barnhart. He has this crane company down in, I think it's Alabama. And they literally decided, like, here's how much we're going to make, and that's it. We're never going above this amount. And then they decided to give away their company to the National Christian Foundation. They run the company, they started the company, God owns the company. And that's this example of I have enough of what's mine, and therefore, if God's going to continue to bless it, I'm going to use it in a different way. So, why does this reduce tensions? Well, a couple of reasons this helped our impact investors sort of reduce their tensions. One, it shifts the locus of control from the investor, it's all about me, to it's all about God, right? I'm literally on my hands and knees every day saying, Lord, these are not my resources. They're yours, tell me how to spend them. It reduced it by reshaping the battle. I came to an understanding that God didn't want my money. He didn't need my money, but what he wanted was me. And then when I became really cognizant of this, it changed this whole thing of surrender for me. And then lastly, reframing their primary risk. People always talk about financial risk. How much am I going to lose? Making the wrong investment isn't the greatest risk. Disobedience is. And so they reframed the notion of risk from one of financial to one of spiritual. Like not doing what God called me to do was of higher risk than making the wrong investment. So this is kind of their understanding of surrender. And super important, this is not a one-time decision. Every one of our investors, to a person, said this is not easy. This is a constant battle. I got it right today, and tomorrow, this. I'm on my knees every day, and I'm only on the S of surrendering. Like this is a constant struggle. These battles are real. Every conversation you have is real, and that's kind of what they're working on. So this is sort of our model of what managing identity multiplicity looks like in the case of impact investing. A couple of so whats. So what on the academic side? Like so what to theory? If theory is 1,000 case studies, then we ought to say something to these case studies. Number one, it tells about identity multiplicity. We often talk about multiple identities. It's always two. It's social and financial. It's faith and financial. But when you do three, it doesn't work so easy because now you have relationships between, you have configurations, and it's much more complicated. So that's what we start to contribute to. We do that by identifying mechanisms here to show this shadowing, to show this distinguishing, to show this idea of surrendering as real concepts that are based in our data, based on a Christian identity, based on a Christian belief, and important to theory. And then lastly, we show the role of faith impact investing in social entrepreneurship. We encourage what is called a theological turn to entrepreneurship research or social entrepreneurship research. Theological turn says essentially that there is a deity, there is a God, and that your belief in God will actually fundamentally change how you think about things. Like nearly in all the rest of the business school, not this one of course, in most business schools, we will say the main way we believe things, the main way we understand things is through an economic, individualistic, materialistic sort of view. Here's the problem. How do you explain empathy? How do you explain altruism? How do you explain these concepts that we know are happening, yet don't fit neatly in this idea? And what a theological turn starts to do is push that and say, yes, we can complement that economic understanding with a theological understanding. And why would we do that? Well, number one, prevalence. 80% of the world's population has some faith tradition. 2, centrality. It is really important to most people in the way they live their lives, how they make their decisions, what they do. 3, there is a large literature. Everyone's like, oh, you can't study faith. Yes, you can. The psychologists, the sociologists, the economists have been doing it for centuries. We can do it in the business school. We really can. We're already leaning on those disciplines. And so the encouragement to the scholars is that. Practice. I think this actually changed the mindset of capital in society. Like this literally can change when we begin to look at the role of faith and what we do with those dollars. And many of you are like, yes, I got that. I know that. Great. And if you don't, I would encourage you to keep thinking about it, like how central is God in my decision for my finances? Second, there's an opportunity to shape the entire economic system. I get this is a big statement, but bear with me, it's based on our data. We note that capitalism is influenced by the actors around us. And so if we say, as a set of believers in Jesus, here's our beliefs, and then here's our investment strategies, we'll have a tremendous impact on capitalism and impact investing by allowing Christians to reflect their own values and influence the capital markets. Third, early on we said there's trillions of dollars managed by faith-based investors, and a fraction of it is finding their way to impact investing. At least one of those reasons is because we can't seem to understand this charity mindset and this investing mind. Like those two things just don't go to, I'm either giving it away or I'm getting a return. I can't mix those things. I guess our parent would say, yes, you can, and there are ways to do that. My encouragement is to say, if that's you, if that feels like a call to your man, look at it. There are ways to do it. And then lastly, 2019, totally unrelated to faith. Business Roundtable comes out with BlackRock Financial, who says, it is no longer, in our finance class, what do we say? It is all about the maximization of wealth for the shareholders. What the Business Roundtable said, no, it's about all stakeholders. What we're increasingly starting to say is that's true, and for business practitioners, impact investors, and I would say for scholars, it's time for us to take more seriously God as an important stakeholder and what his role and what his position is in all of this. So there is a QR code. If you want the article, it's all yours. You want to cure insomnia, that's the best way to do it. But I want to thank you for listening and be happy to open it up for questions.
Let's open it up. What questions do you guys have?
So you've got the threefold framework for identities, and that emerged from the interviews that you did.
Correct.
But are you saying that you also saw that those identities, the spiritual, social, and financial, in separate literature? Are there other identities that you thought that you might see? Just play that out a little bit more, if you would.
Anytime we're doing qualitative, right? Qualitative is not quite like quantitative. Quantitative is I've got this variable, I measure it, now I go figure out how does X relate to Y. In qualitative, we often have a general idea about what we're going to say. Like we knew we were doing identity theory, and we knew we were studying Christian impact investors. That's about all we knew. So we often will do some initial interviews. We do about 10 interviews to say, like, what's going on? They're sort of exploratory. Hey, what's keeping you up at night, right? It's almost always, tell me about the benefits and tell me about the challenges. And usually it's really just tell me about the challenges. And what you will hear is person after person. And so as we were doing these, people were saying, look, I'm having these challenges. Like I'm really struggling. I'm supposed to be an investor. How can I say I'm an investor if I'm earning 0% return? Like that feels like I'm just a charity. And so it was really, how do we identify what's going on in the data through exploratory interviews, and then how do we go deep in that? So we didn't start with, hey, these are the 3 identities, we're going to go do them. We instead started with exploratory interviews and said, let the data guide us about what we're going to talk about. And then once we started to see some consistency in those themes, then we go deep on those specific constructs, those specific identities.
And those were the three, those are the
Those
only
are the 3 that emerge.
Yeah.
Yeah, people will talk about it. They'll talk about a family identity. They'll talk, right? Like, but usually they're connected. Like the family identity would be, I need to provide for my family. What they were really saying is, I need a bigger return on my financial investment so that I can provide for my family. Not to say there aren't other identities. Of course there are. In our data, we found 3 primary identities that mostly drove what we saw in the data. Oh, I got lots of things I can talk about. Go.
I want to hear more. The comment about we need to think of God as a stakeholder stood out to me, and then you had it on the PowerPoint as well. And I think I've always thought that God would want us to care for all of our stakeholders. And I'm just wondering how that do you have any ideas of how that would look different if we add God to the list of stakeholders versus just loving all of our stakeholders as a faithful act to God?
I think it's not one or the other, right? I think it's both. I think the fact that we love one another through all these other things probably comes from a meta logic of, at least for Christians, from this God, right? From this God influence on our lives. And so I think that becomes an issue of what does it mean to take seriously that God is in the room? Let me say it a different way, and this is particularly to scholars. We don't tolerate a sacred secular divide in our daily lives. We tell our students not to worry about it. We try and encourage them, it's integrated. I heard at lunch, faith and learning integration, and I hear faith and business integration. I never hear faith and business separate. Keep them totally segmented, never should the two meet. Yet, as scholars, I will argue we have allowed the sacred secular divide to happen. We have allowed our faith to influence research if we are doing faith-based research and sending it to a faith-based journal. And we have not allowed faith to come full center when we're sending it to a secular mainstream journal. And so my encouragement is that. One way as scholars we do that is that. Now, how do we do that as investors? How do we do that as entrepreneurs? I think there's a lot of answers to it. We did another paper on how do entrepreneurs deal with the high highs and low lows of entrepreneurship. And our finding essentially was in the lows, their entrepreneurial identity goes with it. Like, my business stinks. I might have a slide on it. Yeah, right. I'm excited. Ugh, this is hard. It's working. I'm messed up. Give up the good for the great. I think I'm going bankrupt. I'm good. I don't know why I get so down. I was wrong. I stink. Suck. Whatever it says. And we're like, this is the life of an entrepreneur. No, no, no. This is the day in the life of an entrepreneur. This is what they go through on a regular basis. So we tried to say, while they're doing that and their identity is fluctuating with the outcomes of their venture, like, if you don't believe me, go talk to any entrepreneur who either just had an awesome success or is really struggling. And it will not just be about their business. It will be about them. And we said, okay, cool. What would it look like if we dropped God into the middle of that conversation? We end up creating something that looks like this. I know it's super confusing. That's why we only let 10 people read our papers. But what this essentially says, look at the black line. The black line is just the highs and lows. Okay? What the highs and lows say is the entrepreneurial identity is at a low when the business is at a low. The entrepreneurial identity is a high when the business is at a high. We started talking to people. We said, what gets you out of those highs and lows? They're like, my faith. I said, I know it's your faith. But how? Right? We're asking how and why questions. They said, oh, well, I actually have this other identity. It's a faith-based identity. I said, no. Tell me more. They said, it's a relational identity with God. I actually see myself as a child of God. Therefore, that becomes important to how I understand my entrepreneurial venture. I see that it is received, not achieved. My entrepreneurial identity is very much achieved. Man, I'm great or I stink. That's not so with your faith-based identity. And so we end up creating a construct that we call a relational identity with God. And this is a comparison between those two kinds of identities. They're just different. They're very different kinds of identities. So what we see is that in this work, now by the way, like, we can point to Henry Nouwen, I can point to Tim Keller, I can point to people that have talked about every one of these things. They're not new to the world, but they are new to the scholarship. And if we can allow some of our Christianity to influence that scholarship, we can now say, look, you know what you really care about? You really care about persistence or stability or well-being of the entrepreneurs. Let me tell you one way to deal with the well-being of entrepreneurs. Bring their Christian faith into it. And people are like, oh, you can't say that. I said I just did, and I got data to back it up. And so what we see is they actually have two different identities that are interacting one with the other. In times of low, their actual faith-based identity is affirming. It says, no, 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 you're not a failure. We have one entrepreneur who says, I turned the corner when I realized that I wasn't a failure. God was systematically withholding success from me because he knew my heart couldn't stand it. He knew my ego was too big, and that if I had had success, I would be in a very dangerous place. We have another at the high, good friend of mine. He has a tattoo right here. It says, not by my power, not to my glory. Because we know what happens when entrepreneurs have a lot of success. And again, nobody in this room, but sometimes entrepreneurs get so successful that they're not only great in business, they are great in everything. Just ask them. And all I mean by that is it creates narcissistic tendencies. And it creates this thing that says, oh, it's all about me, and it's not. It doesn't have anything to do with you. It has an awful lot to do with God. And so what this creates is an inter-identity stability. So one example of how do we bring this central? Well, we continue to look at what role faith plays, right? So when we started this work, someone said, look, I don't understand why you're doing this faith thing. I shared this earlier. I said, when someone walks in the door on Monday morning, do you think their gender affects entrepreneurship? Oh, yes, yes, yes. Every way, and how they get money and the amount of money they do or don't get. Oh, awesome. Do you think race matters Monday morning? Yeah. I said, awesome. But for some reason, faith can't walk through that door? I said, if you think faith matters, regardless of what your own perspective is, I don't care if you're atheist, I don't care if you have a different faith, if you think it matters when we walk through the door on Monday morning, then we are incomplete as scientists. We have an incomplete understanding. In fact, we have a wrong understanding of entrepreneurship if we don't drop faith in the middle of the conversation. If it's affecting outcomes and we're not doing it, then we're not actually representing what's actually going on. And so that would be my encouragement, whether it's marketing or economics or ethics, and ethics is probably a little easier because there's a much deeper tie there. The reality is it affects everything. And it affects everything to lots of people. And so that's the encouragement. It's like, I don't know how in your specific paper or your specific, but if we imagine a Christian identity as a meta-logic, well, it's going to affect the way we do everything. Resilience, coping, like go right down the line. So I don't know if that answers your question.
So your illustration, or you got the illustration from somebody else with the two axes?
Yes.
Okay, and predominantly, it's falling into this quadrant and very difficult to get into that upper right quadrant, right?
I wouldn't say it's very difficult. I just said there aren't a lot of opportunities.
So that's my question, I
Yeah.
guess, and that is, I guess remove it from the individual entrepreneur and maybe look at venture-based fund.
For sure.
Are there decent models out there that are combining these two and that you would point to as saying it can be done on a venture-based model, choosing some of the right entrepreneurs who are doing some of the right things to impact society?
So I think the answer is yes and no. It's a perfect answer to give because then I have to be correct, right? But it means I also have to be wrong. What I would argue is this. What we see is that, yes, there are some opportunities to maximize social, spiritual, and financial. But they're a 1 in a million. They're like you can almost always find better opportunities for higher financial returns than you can for helping reduce recidivism. Right, so there's almost always reasons why. Now, that's not to say people aren't trying to do this, and it's also not to say you have to lose money. So one of the things we talk about is concessionary returns, not zero returns, not negative returns. I think you almost always we have to make some trade-off between what the financial market we could get absent these considerations and what that return might look like with these considerations.
All right, then let's segue to primarily the focus is on spirit-led, great impact. Are there examples of venture funds out there that are hugely impactful in their approach?
So one of our co-authors, a woman named Amy Minnick, she runs something called Impact Foundation. It's out of Kansas City. They manage $200 million. And they do lots of investing. Much of their focus happens to be international. It need not be. There's another wonderful entrepreneur investor that we came into touch with. Half of his portfolio is impact portfolio is international, half of it's on the south side of Chicago. He said, this is in my backyard. How dare I not try and tackle the problem that is right in front of me? So you see examples there. You will also see people get away from the social for a minute. You do see people trying to pursue entrepreneurial ventures that are not necessarily social, but they are driven by faith-driven entrepreneurs, right? So like there's a venture capital fund out of California called Sovereign's Capital. There's a fund down in Texas called the Eagle Venture Fund. There's something out of Chicago called 11 Tribes. What these are trying to do is say, we're going to back and support faith-based entrepreneurs, even if their venture might be a SaaS product, some software as a service kind of thing. And so what they're doing is eliminating the spiritual, they're eliminating the social, they're not eliminating the spiritual. They're saying we can measure spiritual maybe by the impact of the entrepreneur and the impact of the entrepreneur in their business, in their community, how they bless people that way. The other thing that is interesting, and I know some people know about this, others don't. There's a wonderful organization out of New York City called Praxis. Praxis has this wonderful model they call redemptive entrepreneurship. They essentially think about it as 3 circles. It moves from exploitative to ethical to redemptive. Exploitative, I win, you lose, zero-sum game. Okay? That's the way they would argue some forms, at least negative forms of capitalism, maybe look. Ethical, I win, you win. Right? We can structure a way where it's sort of good for everyone. Redemptive is you win, I'm willing to sacrifice. And so that could be for your employees, that could be for the beneficiaries of the organization, that could be for your supply chain partners, et cetera. And so they have this whole model around what's called redemptive entrepreneurship that a guy named Andy Crouch, who used to be at Christianity Today, worked on, and has really developed this in a more comprehensive way than I've seen lots of other people talk about it. So Praxis runs an entrepreneurial cohort. There's an accelerator in my backyard in Cincinnati, Ohio called Ocean. They run entrepreneurial cohorts. They're high-tech accelerators, but they're backing faith-based entrepreneurs. So again, sort of a mixed answer of you see full returns on the entrepreneur side where faith is an important component. When you add that social constraint, almost because of the kinds of how did we get to social problems? Well, because the market didn't work. And nonprofits maybe didn't work, or government did or didn't work. Like the way we have those problems is because they're market failures, right? They don't fit neatly into an economic return sort of model. That's not to say you can't do some economic return. There's a coffee shop down the street from us. And their whole model is they employ people with felony records. Now, the best way to make coffee is probably not that. They probably won't be the fastest or the best or whatever the thing is. But that social problem is so deep to them, they're like, if it takes us longer to train these people, if they don't show up for work as many days as we sort of hope they would, we're going to work on that stuff. But yeah, it's going to cost the bottom line as we try and build into those people. I don't know if that answers your question, but
That's good, man.
Okay.
You observed that only a tiny fraction of capital is invested in an impact investing way. And you've also observed that 70% of the people in the world, or 70% or some population, I forget what you said, are religious. And you further observed that there's these tensions, these identity tensions, and you're trying to explain them, understand them in your paper. How can your paper help break through these identity tensions and get more money invested into impact investing? Is that realistic, or is there anything? What's your perspective on that?
It's one lever. It's one of lots of levers. So I'm not about to say, if they just read our paper, man, the cash will be flowing. That's not true. But what I do think it does is this, and this is a conversation we've had over the last 15 years, and I mean industry, I mean the academy, which is when social entrepreneurship first came to the front. People were like, whoa, isn't that just charity? And it's either charity or it's business, or you would hear the best thing people can do for society is maximize wealth, and then it's up to them if they choose to give it away or not. And what you start to do is have this blending of logics. Well, the blending of logic, that means I'm going to combine something around financial and something around social into a single entity. It's complicated. It's mostly complicated, though, for mental reasons. It's mostly complicated because we have mental models of here's what financial is and here's what social is. But where did that come from? Well, it just came from time. It came from legacy. It came from institutional ways of thinking. And that if we allow to suspend judgment just for a minute and can start to say, what happens if you cross some of those things? I think it's one mechanism. There's lots of interesting work going on in this space. So I do not throw the lots of faith-based investors under the bus. This is actually data from GIN, which is a global impact investing network. They're actually pleading with, saying, please, faith-based investors, step into, we need you, and it fits your mental model. It fits your religious mental model. And so I think it is a little bit of how do we break down mental models of, sometimes people call it two-pocket investing, right? What if everything's one pocket? What if everything is just in the same pocket generating some subset of returns, and that dollar I can use to do multiple things? And so I think that's a bit of it. Can we fundamentally solve the problem? No, but can we change the institutional thinking about it's either charity or it's financial returns? Yeah, I think that's where you can start to have some effect to say, what if it were both? Please keep pushing.
thought maybe you would say if we could just convince people that shadowing and distinguishing are fine, please do more of that, that might be the solution. Maybe that's not your view.
Well,
You didn't say that.
I think it is an example, right? I think it is an example to say, what I just said is we need to get people to have this mindset that you can combine those things. Those are just two ways to combine the mindset. One actually doesn't combine it, it keeps them separate, but it allows us to sort of say, and, right? The first one sort of says it's both at the same time. The second one sort of says, oh, I can have charity and financial and faith all sitting alongside each other, and I just need to get some minimum threshold. So they are mechanisms by which I think we can change that mindset. Yep. Please.
We take a group of students every year to the Kingdom Advisors Conference, which is a group of
I know, yep.
a couple thousand faith-based investors, and impact investing is a massive narrative. I get the sense that a lot of Christian capital is moving from the capitalist box to the spirit-led box. Maybe a small percentage of capital, but definitely a trend. What do you think about how do we frame this narrative without being without excluding ourselves from the market? Because I think one of the things that I heard in the last conference was if all Christian money moves from capitalist to spirit-led, that would mean all Christians are removed from shareholder meetings. And of course, we want to be involved in the public marketplace so that we can talk about what you described of adding the, why, adding God into faith. I'm just curious, how would you recommend framing that narrative of, I don't think we necessarily want to say impact investing is better than capitalist investing. But what I hear you saying is we should at least be considering this through our identities, specifically through our faith and our value system.
Yeah, let me try and, I may not get there, so push me if I don't. I think there's a couple of things at play there. Number one is, you talked about what I would argue are two different buckets. One is about charity, one is about investing. This sort of sits in between those two, right? So are we having the charitable dollars go to impact investing, or are we having the investing dollars? Those are sort of two different ways that capital could flow amongst these set of alternatives. I suppose what I would argue is that most investors already have a portfolio mentality. So set aside faith altogether. They invest in some major stock indexes, they invest in international funds, they invest in different industries, so they already have some diversification across their portfolio. I think what this argument is, you are right. And at Kingdom Impact Advisors, you're going to be in the center of the conversation about like, what does it look like to actually do this? And yet, I'll argue it looks something like that. This is the dollars that are chasing financial return. That's the dollars chasing impact investing. So did that circle get bigger? Yes, it went from there to there. Congratulations, right? Like, with all due respect, that's a nice movement, but the opportunity of converting like that or like this, yeah, that's massive. Now, I'm not suggesting everyone should be all impact investing, all that. I'm really not suggesting that. And at the end of the day, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm suggesting you ought to do whatever your faith tells you to do. And I would push just as much here, right? Like, an awful lot of people are really content with, hey, I'm just going to invest in the S&P 500. Okay, run that through a biblical filter and then see where you end up. And again, I'm not, this isn't meant to be critical of what people are doing. It's actually the opposite. It's meant to encourage people to think about, man, what is sitting underlying the asset you're investing in? And, there's lots of mutual funds that are biblically responsible or socially responsible, right? There's ways to take our dollars and can quit thinking about our dollars as, and again, I'm not suggesting anyone in here is doing this, but collectively, we out there are. Quit thinking about our dollars as our dollars' only function is to generate financial return and everything else is separate. I think that's a sacred secular divide. It's a really convenient one. And yet I would argue that our encouragement is, how do we integrate that? So how do you integrate it across charity? Yes. How do you integrate it across impact investing? Yes. How do you integrate across some sort of financial return or cap? Yes. And What does it look like? What other filters are you using on those financial investments so that they are more biblically aligned? That's sort of where I would encourage. So I agree with you completely there, but I do think it's still a really small part of the overall.
At this time, I do want to just officially recognize you, Brett. So thank you so much for that presentation. I'll give you a round of applause. So on behalf of the Calvin University School of Business, funded by the Calvin Center for Innovation in Business, I do want to present this award to Brett. This is the award for scholarship on Christianity in business, awarded for this article and honor, we want to honor you and your co-authors with this. So can I give this to you?
Of course, thank you. Thank you, and let me say, on behalf of my co-authors, we are truly humbled. Like this has been an awesome day, and what I would say is, stinks to be my other 4 co-authors. Like they didn't get to experience it, but in all seriousness, I love what you guys are doing here. I love the work that you're doing. I love the encouragement around scholarship and around integration and sitting in classes and talking to faculty and talking to administrators. What you guys are doing here is special. It is awesome, man. All I would say is keep doing it, keep going, keep dreaming, keep pushing, keep going further. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you everybody for coming today too. Thank you very much.
So just, Brett has to leave in about 10 minutes to go to a dinner, but if you want to hang around and talk with him informally up front, feel free to do so. Thank you for coming.